life experience in 20 years than you can in 40 for some people, often in quite tragic, unfortunate ways. But in any case, we've got a different kind of life experience, and it's equally valid and important, and it has to be part of the conversation and part of the debate. And it can't be trivialized, and we mustn't let that happen. So, you know, I'm sure that you'll be in meetings where, and if you haven't already, then you will be in meetings where you're put down or belittled or sort of not listened to properly, and particularly if you're a woman, particularly if you're a woman of colour, or if you have, you know, other intersecting identities. So I just remember that there is a community out there of people like us, and we're all standing with you, so you're not alone. About the baby of the house stuff, it's pretty infantilizing, isn't it? I mean,
yeah,
especially for young women, because in fact my predecessor, Chris Leslie in Nottingham East, was also the baby of the house when he was an MP the first time round for Shipley. So that's quite interesting, and I haven't had a conversation with him about what that was like for him as a young man, but Mari Black and I have spoken about being babies of the house and how we're sort of put down or infantilized by older middle and upper class men. So this Tory MP, I can't remember who it is because there are so many of them now, unfortunately. But one of the really old ones came up to me and said, in such a plummy voice that I could hardly even understand him, he goes, aren't you a baby of the house? And I was like, yeah, I am. And he goes, oh, right, does that bestow upon you any sort of special privileges? Or I'm like, no, apart from having people like you coming up to me asking if I'm baby of the house.
So do you just sort of tackle it with a bit of humour and like just get on with it, or do you ever feel like saying anything different to that?
No, I just let it wash over me, because it's by far not the worst stuff that happens in Westminster. You know, it's a bit patronising, but it's generally sort of the things that are said, at least, aren't unkind.
No.
The worst bits about Westminster, I think, is the sense of sort of it's the whole institution and the way that the institution works not to serve our interests. And certainly as a person of colour there, you feel so visible, hyper visible, but also very invisible at the same time. And that's the most uncomfortable thing. And then I suppose it's things like I'll notice that I get jeered at more by the Tory MPs than other people do. So, and you know, I don't really mind that. It shows I'm getting under their skin. But last week I was speaking in the Westbury debate about Roger Jenrick's cash for favours, as we call it. And he stood up and heckled me. And now when you listen to the audio, the chamber was so loud with Tory MPs shouting at me while I was talking. That wasn't really happening so much to other sectors, but it was happening to more young women who were speaking on our side of the house.
Yeah. It's I suppose that links up to one of the questions we've had, which is potentially linked to what you've just said. What could be, if you could change one thing about Parliament, what would you change?
People in it. I think we need an overhaul of Parliament. It needs to be more representative of what the country looks like. You'd be shocked at some of the things that you hear in there. Well, you probably wouldn't be. But I'd urge people, you know, people watching this and people who I know are doing such amazing work, in our communities, in mutual aid groups, in our workplaces, to get involved in party politics, because it is generally stale, but it's also come a very long way, even since I joined party politics when I was 16, so in 2013. It's come a very long way, and we need to make sure that we don't let all of that energy dissipate, and we don't let the last few years go to waste.
Mm-hmm.
We push things much further, so that we never see again policies like the hostile environment, or like the bedroom tax, which is what prompted me to get involved.
Yeah, great. We've had another question that it'd be nice to answer. So everybody, well, pretty much everybody listening is either a student activist, student volunteer. We've got some staff members who support them. And one of the questions we've had is, what would you like to see students' unions doing to encourage young people, in particular, to be interested in politics?
Oh, grand. This is from Hannah from Nottingham.
Yes.
Great, that's the my constituency. Hi, Hannah. What more can student unions do? I think it would be good to see more joint working between student unions and community unions. So in Nottingham, we've got Acorn, the renters union, a branch of that has been set up here. And it would be good to see the SU engaging with them. I think MPs and councillors have a role in that too, and should be engaging with someone else, a Trent alumni. Hey,
Nottingham people.
And you're from Nottingham as well, aren't you?
From Nottingham. I love Nottingham.
You don't have to be from Nottingham to be in this event, but it helps.
No.
Sorry, I got distracted. What else can be done by student unions? I think because SUs have quite a wide reach, on social media, but also within the universities themselves. So I think it's important for SUs to be amplifying demands of students, and particularly during the big LM protests. I know that a lot of universities have, everywhere has a problem with institutional racism, but particularly, I hear it from students at Nottingham Trent University, the problems that they've been having, and I think it's really important for the SU to amplify demands that they have.
Mm-hmm. That's brings me nicely onto another question I had for you. So one of the things that we're going to be talking about immediately after this actually is addressing inequalities within student opportunities in particular. So this festival's particularly focused on student volunteering, student media, students who fundraise, and societies and sports clubs. So I anecdotally call that all the fun stuff that happens through universities and colleges, but it isn't just the fun stuff, it's the serious stuff too. But we know that within student opportunities, there are lots of students who kind of participate but don't necessarily take on leadership positions because they can't, or it's not set up for them to be able to do that. But there's also loads and loads of students who can't participate at all because there's barriers in the way that stop them from doing that, or they don't feel like it's a place for them or a space for them. And I think that's something that we would like everybody to reflect on across the festival. We've got a conversation session after this keynote to talk about that. Do you have any thoughts about what you would do if you were in our position about addressing some of those barriers?
It's a really interesting question.
Big question, sorry.
Yeah, it wasn't that long ago for me being at university, and I can certainly empathise with people who don't feel like it's a place for them. It really never felt like a place for me, and I felt very uncomfortable there. And actually, there are a lot of parallels that I can draw between being at university and being an MP. going to university, even though I went to Nottingham University, it was in my home city. I'd lived there for 23, well, no, it wasn't 23 years because I was 21 when I went, but I'd lived there my whole life. And it felt so alien being there. And I'd never felt like I'd been in such a sort of hostile space before. And Parliament felt like that, but much more amplified because people in Parliament have much more power. Trying to think about what would...
Was there anything when you joined Nottingham that made you feel, okay, maybe this is a place for me? Like, were there any groups or communities?
The BME network, and that was in my second year, and the BME officer was someone called Moloch, and they were a fantastic activist who was working on things like decolonise the curriculum, decolonise the syllabus even, and things like trans rights, against the prevent agenda. And then the other thing that I was involved in while I was there was the living wage campaign. And I think that's really important while you're at university for students and workers to come together, because often university management tries to pit us against each other as having different interests, when actually, the cleaners at the university and the lecturers at the university and the students all ultimately have the same interests. And I think it's really important for students to actively show solidarity with workers when they're taking action. But I get that doesn't really answer the question. I mean, it's such a huge problem, isn't it? There's so much to change, and I think when you step back, it can feel insurmountable. But I think it's important to strengthen the liberation caucuses, and for people in leadership positions now to do everything they can to create new leaders, because that's what being in a leadership position is about. It's not about just, being there and then pulling the ladder up. A measure of your success in this next year will be how you create new leaders and how you reach out to people who are marginalised or more marginalised than yourselves. And a lot of people, I don't know who's been elected into different positions, but there will be people who come from backgrounds where they're underrepresented in leadership roles, and you yourselves will be an inspiration to other students.
Yeah, that's true. That's really true. And hopefully really nice for those of you that are just starting as reps and part-time officers, full-time officers to hear. Jack's asked a really interesting question about this, actually, that be really interested to hear what you think about it. So Jack said that they're about to start as an academic representative, and what they're wondering, what's your philosophy on voting on personal views versus constituent views? What do you do when these views conflict? So I suppose that's about managing that, like where you feel strongly about something and perhaps your constituents feel a bit different, or it's nuanced for them. How do you balance that?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I think is far more of a problem for people who represent constituencies, like say rural constituencies, or constituencies where there might be a strong view on certain things that might be contentious. My constituency, because it's an inner city constituency, those problems don't arise so much. But I think it's really important as an elected representative not to pander or to give a single inch to reactionary views and to social conservatism, even if there are some people who are asking you to do that. I'll do what's best I'll be the voice of working class people in Parliament, particularly working class people in my constituency, and I'll do what I think is best and what minority groups are also telling me, because their voices are important too. So for example, if it's, say, on trans rights, and there's a big group of people in my constituency who you know, who don't want trans women to have rights, well, that's tough. I'm here to represent the working class in all of our diversity, and that means protecting those who are most marginalised.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of in terms of like forming your political opinions, I know that one of the things that lots of new elected leaders in students' unions find is that they're learning, like everyone's learning all the time. I know I've been learning so much, like from reading about the Black Lives Matter movement, and learning should always continue. But what I'm sure there's times as an MP where you're having to make an opinion on something or cast a vote on something that is huge and complex. And do you have any advice for particularly for our elected officers on doing that and having that confidence in saying, no, this is what I think about this and this is where I'll stand on this?
Yeah, that's the thing about MPs and about any elected representative, is that we're not specialists. We're sort of general representatives, if you like, and we don't necessarily have specialist knowledge or expertise in, I mean, we will in certain areas, but there will be areas where our knowledge is very general. And I think it's just important to read a lot, read as much as you can. And also, you know, where you have a conviction for something, don't let anyone shake that. So I take the example of trans rights. You might have not read every single book on trans rights that there is to read, but I'm sure that you have the knowledge that you need, and that you've listened to people in the trans community and educated yourself. I'd say as well, it's important to be able to be able to hold your hands up where you've got something wrong, and to say, just to be very open and acknowledge that we're always in a constant state of learning. We're always learning new things, and that's fine. We're all on a journey, if you like. Yeah.
Thank you. So we've had a few more questions. Someone, anonymous attendee, so I don't know who it was, has asked, they've never engaged in party politics, but they've been involved with grassroots campaigning and some student movement politics. They've asked, what would you say is the best way for them to approach getting involved in party politics? And then they've put in brackets that this can seem very inaccessible for lots of reasons from the outside. So what's your advice for them to get involved in party politics?
I think it is very inaccessible, you're right. I came into party politics also through grassroots campaigning. It was, as I said, the bedroom tax that made me get involved, and I eventually thought, you know, having seen all of the left groups in the circles I was campaigning in, I think the Labour Party is the only sort of party political vehicle for huge wholesale change. So I would say join your local party, whichever party that is, and if you can, try to go to meetings, but also stay involved in grassroots activism, because the role of the Labour Party, or, well, I can only really speak about the Labour Party, but the role of the Labour Party is not to replace grassroots organising, it's to amplify it, and it's to sort of be like a parliamentary wing of that. Mm-hmm. That grassroots movements should all be supported by the Labour Party. So it's not an either or, it's both. And I'd encourage you to not just to stay involved in grassroots activism because it's the right thing to do, but also that's probably where your support network will come from if you want to be active in party politics. I know that for me it is.
Thank you.
Although I've got fantastic comrades in the Labour Party as well.
So I'll go through to another one of our questions, and then if anybody's got any other questions, we've probably got about time for about three or four more. So get your questions in if you want them answering now. So what role do you think? So given who all of our audience are, we've got leaders of student fundraising organisations, we've got staff who support student volunteers, elected officers. What role do you think that student leaders have in shaping the future of the UK? I know that you're a big passionate advocate for grassroots campaigning, and what role do you think that the people who are listening have?
Oh, this is a good question. I'll say from the offset that I don't know an awful lot about student politics, but I've seen people achieve amazing things through student politics, like decolonising the syllabus. That was a student union campaign, and was it an NUS campaign? I think a Black students campaign. Mm-hmm. I think that one of the great things about university is that you've got people from lots of different backgrounds all in one place, and it's a real opportunity to educate your peers who perhaps haven't thought about these things before. So I think there's real power there, and you also have access to decision makers on your campuses, mm-hmm. Like the vice chancellors and the leadership team. So I'd keep putting pressure on them if there are things that you want to see change at your university.
Thank you. So Catherine has asked quite specifically, have you got any advice for anyone wanting to stand as a county councillor while studying at university? And they've apologised for how specific that is, but I suppose we could broaden that out a bit in terms of any advice for people who want to stand in politics in some way.
I actually stood as a county councillor while I was at university, so let me cast my mind back.
You've got a perfect example.
I'd say, I feel a bit irresponsible giving student advice because I wasn't at university for that long, and I don't think I'm in the best place to do it. But I'd say I think that standing for elected office is a great thing to do. I think that you learn a lot from that, like how to run a campaign, a lot of on-the-spot thinking when you're going around and knocking on doors, and some people ask some quite difficult, quite complex policy questions, and just having to deal with different sorts of people. What advice would I give? To organise your time well, better than I did.
Good tip.
To be able to prioritise what's important to you. Some people might say that it's not a good idea to do, mm-hmm. But if it's important to you and if it's one of your priorities, then you should go ahead and do it.
Some good advice there. I'm sure there's lots of you who are listening to this and thinking, maybe I could do that. Oliver's asked a relevant question to this, asking saying that a lot of people struggle with having the confidence to say, no, I can do this, I can be a leader, whether that's being an MP like you or running for even the presidency of their history society. That takes some confidence. How did you overcome that? Or was it just something where it was, I have to do this? Or how did you kind of give yourself that confidence boost to do it and go for it?
The shame of it is that people who have the least reason to be confident are the most confident. I think that's part of the reason. It's the structures that make that happen, that result in having a parliament like the one that we have. I think often sort of confidence is a necessity for survival, and I think that's how I develop my confidence. And I think if we can build each other up and have more of a recognition that there is space for everyone and we're not in competition with each other, then I think that's good for our sort of collective confidence.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a support network around you? Do you have sort of people you can turn to go, I just need to be told it's going to be okay, and a little gang of people that help you with that?
100%. I've got all the group chats.
just tell me it's going to be all right. Claire's asked an interesting question. She's a vice president at Nottingham College, and she's going to be the student president in 2 days' time. So that's exciting, Claire.
Which Nottingham College campus?
Pardon?
Which Nottingham College campus?
Oh, I don't know. Claire, you'll have to tell us which campus. She's sort of said that she tries to avoid politics at all costs, but it's kind of linked to everything that she's doing. And that sort of reminds me, I've been involved in student opportunities for forever, and it's often sort of dubbed as the bit that's not political, because it's about sports and it's about volunteering and it's about fundraising. And that is all political, actually. And it's just think, what are your thoughts on that, about the role of kind of the voluntary sector and charitable fundraising and sport and people doing stuff themselves and leading their own groups? Why is that political?
I think everything's political, and that's particularly political because it arises from there being a need for something or a gap that people are trying to fill. I think something that's important is thinking about what kind of leader you want to be and whose interests you're representing. And I'm always clear that I'm in Westminster to represent a class interest, and I suppose for you, you're there not to represent your college, but to represent the students and the workers at your college. So I think there's no shying away from things being political, particularly at a time where education is being privatised, particularly further education, and also that we've got things like the UCU disputes with teachers and teaching staff being treated appallingly. It's really important to pick a side and to be political, which I'm sure you're doing.
And having an opinion on something is being political. It just doesn't always feel like that, perhaps.
Yeah, you know, sending a message to the union branch at your college or university and saying how can I help, or sharing a post, or just chatting to one of your teachers in a seminar. All of those things are political.
You're absolutely right. So I just wanted to ask you one more thing, and I watched your maiden speech in preparation for chatting to you today. I saw it when you were elected, but I watched it again, and I'd encourage everybody else to watch that. So for those that don't know, could you just explain what the purpose of the maiden speech is? Because I know some people won't have seen one before.
So a maiden speech is the first speech that you make in Parliament. In fact, I got heckled during my maiden speech saying she's only just got here, when I spoke about the whole place being archaic. I was like, yeah, that's kind of the whole point of a maiden speech. And it's meant to be non-controversial. There's a parliamentary sort of parliamentary convention that says that you shouldn't heckle people during their maiden speeches, but that's in exchange for it being a non-controversial maiden speech. And you speak about your constituency and how you came to Parliament and what you want to achieve. And it's also got to be connected somehow to the debate that you're speaking in.
Right. I didn't know that part. Thank you.
Yeah.
So at the end of your maiden speech, you ended with, "If you don't let us dream, we won't let you sleep," which is potentially quite controversial. What did that mean to you? Why was that the last line of your speech? And what message do you want that to send to people?
This was about the way in which our generation, and in fact working class people and marginalised people and people of colour, we've had our sort of dreams and our hopes trampled on by the establishment for forever, and particularly growing up in the era that we've grown up in, you know, under government cuts, impending climate crisis, the rise of the far right, growing inequality. What I was saying there was that we're not going to let that happen. We're not going to let that continue.
Well, I think we'll stop there and leave everybody with that message and encourage everybody to think about that across the festival. Thank you so much for joining us. I was going to say this morning, but it's definitely the afternoon.
There's no time in the
and thanks to everybody for taking part and for sending some good questions in. If anybody wants to carry on chatting about this, we've got some coffee shop tables that we've set up. So they're basically virtual rooms. And we can go to table 2 if anybody wants to carry on talking about this. Nadia, you are of course welcome to join the table and carry on chatting to people, but I'm confident that you've got a lot to do today. But if anybody wants to carry on talking about some of the stuff that we've been discussing in this conversation, then head to table 2 of the coffee shop and you'll find a link to that on the main page for the festival. And that, yeah, I'd just like to say thank you so much, Nadia, for being with us today. Lots of people in the chat have said they want to move to your constituency, so
I'll move to my constituency.
Yeah, Nottingham's really cool, so you're all welcome. And I hope you have a really good day. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed speaking to you. Can we take a quick screenshot for Twitter?
Of course.
Okay.
Smile.
Just smile.
Oh, it's a noisy one.
Best of 2. Hopefully that's a good one there.
I'm always pulling weird faces. I won't be offended if you put one of me pulling a weird face. Thanks everybody for joining, and I hope that you all enjoy the rest of the festival. Get to the next sessions. The next session on the schedule is a conversation that I'm going to kick off and then lead you into discussion groups talking about what we can do about inequalities and student opportunities. So I encourage everybody who's joining in with this to join in that conversation and we can all have a think about it together. But for now, that we'll end there. Thank you so much. Have a good day. I hope it's easy and not too tricky today.
Thanks very much, everyone. Thanks, Rosie.
Bye.